the fiancé yelled at the toddler. Then the little girl silently pointed to something behind her. A wealthy woman screamed into the face of a small girl in a yellow dress, and moments later, she would wish she never had. The mansion was pristine, white, and stuffed with expensive things. The woman in the white gown carried herself as though she owned every room she stepped into. When the tiny toddler wandered in from the hallway, silent, wide-eyed, gripping the hem of her little yellow dress, the woman bent down and shouted directly into her face, finger jabbing the air. The little girl didn't cry. She didn't bolt. She simply raised her small hand and pointed to something behind her. The woman went rigid because what that child was pointing at exposed a truth no one in that room was prepared to face. And hey, welcome back. Before this story begins, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love reading your names from every corner of the globe. And if you're new here, subscribe right now, because we tell stories that stay with you long after you finish watching. Stick around until the very end of today's story. I'm warning you now, the final moment is the kind that makes you put a hand over your mouth. You're not ready for it. Now let's go back to that white mansion and that little girl in the yellow dress. Everyone who visited it called the house perfect. But the one person who lived there every single day knew the truth hiding behind the white walls and the expensive flowers. The Ashworth estate sat at the end of a private road lined with oak trees, and from the outside it looked exactly like the kind of house that appeared in magazines. Everything was white walls, white marble floors, white linen sofas so pristine they looked like nobody had ever actually sat on them. Crystal vases held fresh white flowers replaced every Monday morning. A staircase of pale stone curved upward like something from a fairy tale. It was the kind of home designed to impress visitors, not to comfort the people who lived inside it. Julian Ashworth was 36. He'd built his tech company from nothing, 16-hour days in his 20s, fueled by stubbornness and bad coffee, until it became one of the most respected names in the industry. He had the estate, the cars, the staff, and, as of 8 months ago, a fiancée. Her name was Vanessa. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful, flawless, precise, constructed. She moved through rooms like someone used to being watched, and spoke to the staff with a politeness that was really just distance. She'd moved into the estate 3 months earlier and had already rearranged the furniture twice and made it quietly known that she now ran the household. Most of the staff adjusted. One person couldn't, because she was 3 years old and had no framework for understanding why the woman in white sometimes looked at her like a problem to be solved. Her name was Mira. She was Julian's daughter. Her mother, Julian's former partner Elena, had died 14 months earlier after a sudden illness, leaving Julian to raise a toddler he adored, while carrying a grief he was still learning to bear. Mira had her father's brown eyes and her mother's soft, curly hair, always escaping its clip. She wore her favorite yellow dress as often as her nanny, Mrs. Delgado, allowed. Bought for her by Elena the summer before she died. Mira was small, quiet, and watchful, taking everything in with wide, dark eyes while saying very little. She didn't fully understand what had changed in her house. She only knew it felt colder now, despite the summer heat outside. She spent most of her time in the garden or kitchen with Mrs. Delgado, drifting away from the white formal rooms where Vanessa spent her days. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. Julian was upstairs on a call. Vanessa had 2 friends coming for a lunch planned for weeks, every detail arranged precisely. Mrs. Delgado had settled Mira in the playroom with coloring books, then got pulled into the kitchen for a catering emergency. The playroom door drifted open, and Mira heard laughter down the hall. She set down her crayon and went to see. She padded through the back corridor in her little white shoes and walked straight into the living room, where Vanessa stood with 2 elegantly dressed women, glasses in hand, laughing. Vanessa spotted her instantly. The laughter died. Her expression changed like a door slamming shut behind her eyes. "What are you doing in here?" Her voice wasn't a shout yet, just the tight, compressed edge of someone aware of an audience. Mira looked up. "I wanted to see," she said simply. "You're not allowed in this part of the house. You know that. Mrs. Delgado." "I don't care about Mrs. Delgado right now." Vanessa stepped closer, voice climbing sharp and sudden. She bent down, finger jabbing at Mira's small face. "You do not come in here when I have guests. You stay in your room. You are not to be seen. Do you understand me?" The two guests went very still. One of them, a woman named Renata who had known Vanessa for years, looked visibly uncomfortable in a way she clearly didn't know how to handle, glancing at her friend and then quickly away. Mira didn't cry. She stood completely still, hands at her sides, staring back with an expression of unreadable calm, more composed than anyone else in the room. She didn't flinch. Then, slowly and silently, she raised her small arm and pointed, not at Vanessa, not at the guests, but behind her, toward the staircase. Vanessa turned. Julian stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the banister, face calm, too calm. He'd heard everything. The high ceilings carried sound the way old houses do. Every sharp word, every second his 3-year-old had stood silently beneath a pointed finger. He'd caught it all. Vanessa's tone instantly softened. "Darling, she wandered in during my lunch. I was just... Mira." Julian's voice stayed steady and warm. "Come here, sweetheart." Mira looked up at her father, glanced back at Vanessa once, then walked to the stairs and lifted her arms. Julian came down and scooped her up. She settled against his chest with total, unquestioning trust. He looked at Vanessa over the top of Mira's curls and said nothing. That silence was louder than anything just shouted in the room. Something that had been quietly building for months finally, irreversibly broke through the surface. That evening, after Mrs. Delgado had bathed Mira, read her 2 stories, and tucked her in with her stuffed elephant, Julian sat with his daughter until she fell asleep, then went downstairs to the study, where Vanessa waited, composed, rehearsed. "Sit down," she said before he could speak. "I know what you're going to say, and I need you to hear my side first." He sat and waited. "I know how that looked, but you need to understand. She wanders into spaces she isn't supposed to be in constantly. Every time I try to have one professional moment in my own..." She paused. "In this home?" "She's 3, Julian said. "I know how old she is. She wandered out of the playroom. And that's Mrs. Delgado's fault. It's no one's fault. She's a toddler. She's curious. She's a child." Vanessa was quiet a moment, then said something meant to sound reasonable that landed like a slammed door. "After we're married, I think it would be good for Mira to have more structure, a proper schedule, maybe a different living arrangement. There are wonderful boarding schools for young children that offer..." "Stop!" Julian's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Stop right there." Vanessa looked at him. "You're talking about sending my 3-year-old daughter away," he said. "My daughter, who lost her mother 14 months ago. And you're suggesting we remove her from her own home." "I'm suggesting..." "I heard what you suggested." The room went very quiet. Do you ever reach a moment where a single sentence reveals everything you needed to know about a person? Where something that was always slightly wrong finally comes into complete, terrible focus? That was this moment for Julian. And here is where the story turned. Because Julian, sitting in that quiet white room, looking at the woman he had agreed to marry, had a sudden and very clear thought. He had been so focused on his grief, on building something new, on the idea that Mira needed a family again, that he had stopped seeing what was actually in front of him. He had convinced himself that Vanessa was simply adjusting, that the distance he sometimes felt between her and Mira was temporary, that things would eventually warm up. But a woman who could scream at a 3-year-old and then immediately suggest sending her away was not a woman in the process of adjusting. He stood. I need to think, alone. He walked upstairs, paused a moment outside Mira's door, then sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark, and for the first time in months, truly let himself think. The next morning, Mrs. Delgado came to Julian's office carrying 2 cups of tea, a sign this was a sit-down conversation. She'd worked for the family 4 years, since before Elena died. She'd never once come to him with a complaint about anyone in the household. "There are things I should have told you sooner," she said. "After what I heard yesterday, I can't stay silent anymore." She told him everything. It had been building for 3 months, since the day Vanessa moved in. Not dramatic incidents, nothing that would have looked like proof on its own, but small, consistent things. The way Vanessa spoke to Mira whenever Julian wasn't in the room, short, dismissive, impatient. Not cruel exactly, but cold. Deliberately, persistently cold. The times Mira had tried to show Vanessa something, a drawing, a flower from the garden, the way children constantly bring small things to adults, and Vanessa had glanced at it and looked away without a word. The morning Mira climbed onto the sofa in the white sitting room, and Vanessa physically lifted her off, setting her down on the floor with one sharp sentence, "That sofa isn't for children." Mira hadn't cried. She had simply looked at Vanessa with those wide, dark eyes and quietly left the room. "She stopped trying," Mrs. Delgado said, her voice low. 3 months ago, she used to try with Miss Vanessa. She brought her things. She sat near her. She smiled at her. She paused. "Children always try. It's what they do. They keep trying until something tells them to stop. About 6 weeks ago, she stopped trying. Have you ever noticed a child in your life go quiet in a way they never had before, and felt a cold drop in your stomach realizing the world had taught them something it never should have?" That is exactly what Julian felt in that moment. His jaw tightened, and he said nothing for a long time. "There's one more thing." Mrs. Delgado placed a small crayon drawing on the desk. 2 figures, one tall, one small, the small one in yellow. Underneath, in letters Mrs. Delgado had helped her spell, were 4 words. "Me and my papa. Just the 2 of them. No one else." "She drew this 2 weeks ago," Mrs. Delgado said. "She asked me to help her spell it, then put it in her drawer and never showed a soul. She didn't bring it to you. She didn't bring it to Miss Vanessa. She's already figured out which family in that drawing is the one she actually has." The silence in the office was total. On the desk sat a child's crayon drawing, and it told Julian everything. He called Vanessa into the study after breakfast. The conversation was private and brief. 2 hours later, Vanessa packed 2 bags and called her driver. She didn't raise her voice or slam a door. She walked through the white hallway with perfect posture and left. Mrs. Delgado watched from the kitchen doorway and said nothing. Upstairs, Mira stood on her bed to watch the car disappear between the oak trees. Then she sat down, picked up her stuffed elephant, and held it in her lap. She heard her father's footsteps on the stairs. She'd always known that walk. The door opened. Julian looked deeply tired, in the way that comes from a long emotional weight finally lifting. "Is the lady gone?" Mira asked. "Yes, baby." She considered this seriously, then held out her elephant. "You can hold Ellie. Just for a little bit." Julian took it, felt something behind his eyes burn. "Thank you." "She's very soft," Mira said helpfully. "She is," he agreed. They sat together on the bed in the quiet afternoon, a father, his daughter, and a stuffed elephant named Ellie. Outside, the oak trees swayed, and slowly the house began to feel like itself again. But the story wasn't over. 3 weeks later, something would arrive that would change everything, something connected to Elena. A lawyer called about a sealed envelope that had been sitting in a secure file for 14 months. Elena had written it during one of the last clear stretches before she died, sealed it, and instructed her lawyer to deliver it to Julian only when the time felt right. 14 months had passed. The envelope arrived by courier on a Friday morning. Julian sat in the study and opened it. Elena's handwriting was small, neat, and devastatingly familiar. Julian, if you're reading this, enough time has passed. First, you are a wonderful father. Stop questioning that. You are exactly what she needs. She already knows it. Watch her face when you walk into a room. He paused, thinking of Mira lifting her arms at the top of the stairs the day before. He kept reading. Second, there's something about Mira I should have told you while I still could. You know I wasn't always okay in those final months, that there were dark stretches when I was frightened. I worried I was passing something broken down to her, but she never absorbed the broken parts. Every time I was scared, this tiny person, barely walking, would come find me and press her small hand against my face. Just that, as if to say, I see you, and you're okay. She has always known how to find whoever in the room needs her most. She found you, didn't she? Wherever it happened. She found the person who was hurting, and she did the thing she always does. She offered herself. Julian's mind flew back to that Tuesday afternoon, Mira standing beneath a pointed finger, refusing to cry, refusing to run, simply lifting her small arm. It hadn't been an accusation. It hadn't been defiance. She'd been pointing at him because she had known he was there all along, and she had guided him toward exactly what he needed to see. He pressed a hand over his mouth, breathed, and kept reading. Take care of yourself, please. Not just for her sake, but for yours. You deserve to be happy. You deserve eventually, when you're ready, to find someone who looks at both of you and sees a family, not a complication. Not someone who makes her feel invisible. She'll know the difference. She always does. Trust her instincts. They're better than ours. I love you. I love you both more than I ever said out loud, because I was never good at saying it enough. Watch her face when you walk into a room. That's all you need to know. Elena. The study was completely silent. Outside, somewhere in the garden, Julian could hear Mira talking, full of commentary and the occasional burst of laughter, absorbed in the very serious project of filling a bucket with water alongside Mrs. Delgado. She had been out there for over an hour. He stood and walked to the window, watching his daughter below, small and bright in her yellow dress, curls escaping their clips as always. As if she felt his gaze. That old animal awareness of being looked at by someone who loves you. Mira glanced up, found his window instantly, and her small, serious face broke into the widest smile he had ever seen, both arms shooting straight up into the air. He raised a hand back. She waved both of hers, enthusiastic and impatient, and he laughed, felt it move clean through his whole chest, real and unguarded. He walked out of the study, down the stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the warm morning garden. Mira ran to him across the grass on her small legs, completely certain, the way children are certain of very few things, that he was coming. He caught her, lifted her up into the light. She grabbed his face in both hands, exactly the way Elena had described, just her small, warm palms pressed against his cheeks. Papa, she said, simply that. Yeah, baby, he said, his voice rough. I'm here. She looked at him with Elena's eyes, bright, steady, and completely unafraid, and then leaned forward and pressed one deliberate, very serious kiss to his cheek. He held her tighter, standing there in the garden in the morning sun, his daughter in his arms, Elena's words still warm in his chest. She has always known how to find whoever in the room needs her most. He thought about a small girl in a yellow dress, standing still under a pointed finger, refusing to cry, refusing to look away, raising her arm, pointing, showing him exactly what he needed to see. 3 years old, completely fearless, carrying her mother's gift without even knowing it. She always knows. 6 months later, the white furniture had been replaced with things that were warmer. Sofas the color of autumn, bookshelves full of actual books, a corner of the main room turned permanently into Mira's art space, crayons and paper always out, her drawings pinned to the wall without apology. The house felt different, and everyone who entered it could feel it immediately. Something open, something real, something lived in. On the wall of the study, in a small wooden frame beside the window, hung a child's crayon drawing. 2 figures, one tall, one small, the small one in yellow. Me and my papa. And on the kitchen counter, in a small clay pot Mira had made at nursery and presented to Mrs. Delgado with enormous ceremony, sat a tiny cactus, because Mira had decided the kitchen needed something growing in it. She was not wrong. Have you ever had a small child show you something without a single word that turned out to be exactly what you needed to see? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that the smallest people in our lives sometimes carry the most extraordinary wisdom. See you in the next one.